210. As we continue now in our segment here, our second segment of Talk Anguilla Rebranded Part 2 today. Firstly, you heard from the Ministers of Government on the third anniversary of the APM government coming into office. And now we'll be hearing in just a while from my friends from the Department of Natural Resources as we look at Invasive Plant Awareness Week. Invasive Plant Awareness Week, we have with me at this time Ron Connor. He's the project lead responsible for guiding the project team and liaison between the donor agency and the Department of Natural Resources. Nyasha Child, the project manager responsible for planning, management, coordination, and financial controlling of the project. And Zoya Buckmeyer, field coordinator responsible for coordinating field activities such as surveying and mapping. And of course, Xavier Marisha, the field assistant who supports the field work. This is all about protecting Anguilla's biodiversity by building capacity in invasive plant management. So I want to go across firstly to Ron Connor, the project lead, just to give us a little background and context of this particular invasive plant awareness week. So over to you, Ron.
Okay, good morning, everyone, persons in everyone listening via Radio Anguilla, and also persons within the social media live stream. I would like to say, a special thank you, first of all, to Radio Anguilla for giving us this opportunity to support, to share our project that we have. Our main project, the Darwin Plus project that we have, which is entitled Building Capacity in Invasive Species Management in Anguilla. But as the project manager, I would actually divert this question to Nyasha Child, who would basically more or less give us some more insight into the project in itself. Yeah.
All right, so you have it, Nyasha Child.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, good afternoon to you.
As mentioned before, we are celebrating Invasive Plant Awareness Week from Monday the 26th to this Friday, June 30th. And the objective of this awareness week is to sensitize all Anguillans about invasive plant species, their threats, and how we can collaborate with all of you to reduce the spread of the invasive plants in Anguilla. Our project is targeting 5 plants, and we will speak more about that in just a few minutes. So this awareness week, we would have had a virtual launch by our minister, the Honourable Quincy Murray Gums. Also, yesterday Quincy Gums Murray, my apologies. And yesterday we were on Radio Class FM. Now we're on Radio Anguilla. Yesterday we also had a trivia on Facebook. We're supposed to participate and won prizes. Tomorrow we'll be distributing posters to several agencies, including the schools, customs, and other key government agencies. On Friday, it's our climax of activities, our grand finale with our exhibition, which will be held at the People's Market from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. I want to encourage everyone to come out, participate with us, learn more about these invasive plants, and you can also win prizes.
Yep, I see you're funded. The project is scheduled to be completed by September of next year. But let me just ask, what are invasive plants? Let's start from there. What are invasive plants?
Okay, so yes, Keith, the term invasive plants, before I give the definition of invasive plants, to set a general context, I would like to probably just speak more in terms of alien species and then distinguish between alien species and invasive species. And then, of course, we will understand the greater context in terms of invasive plants as such. So it is quite known that throughout the world, persons travel from place to place. You might go to some place in Europe, some place in Africa, some place throughout the Caribbean. You see a plant that you well and truly admired, love, and you will want to bring it to your island. So that plant that you would be bringing to your island, for example, that plant is not native to your island. So in Anguilla, for example, we have over 216 plants, so to speak, that are considered to be alien species. Alien in the sense that they are not native to Anguilla. Okay? And there's no problem with that. For example, we know the tamarind tree, coconut trees. All of those are alien plants. They have been introduced. the term also, sometimes you might use the word non-native species, introduced species, and alien species. It's interchangeably the same thing. But again, looking at the context of it, some plants that are introduced, just like animals in general, that are introduced to an island, they were referred to, again, alien species. But in terms of let me just back up a bit here. In terms of the word invasive species now, it basically refers to any plant or animal that has been introduced to an island that has gone on to that has the potential to, is actually causing major problems.
Yeah, so there is a distinction, invasive
right.
and alien.
Right, so alien is anything that is not necessarily native to your island, no problem. Lots of alien species provide a food source for us, yeah? And we depend heavily on them and we love them. But the ones now that are invasive are basically any plant or animal that well and truly can go on and cause major impacts. It can be economic impacts in terms of, the amount of money that you have to, for example, in agriculture, there are a lot of weeds and so forth. They are invasive and they cause farmers, they cause a lot of problems to farmers, also, for example, the lionfish, it completely, disseminate the main species of fish that are supposed to be around the reef system, what we refer to as the grazers. But those fish in themselves still carry on. They actually impact us in many, many ways. Just as many weeds, many animals. The giant African snail, I know that is quite a species that has been, caused major impact here in Anguilla. The invasive monkey, we know that has caused a problem as well. But for the purpose of this project, and we are basically focusing on the five targeted invasive plant species.
Yeah, and what are those five, the five that you're targeting?
Yeah, the five, I will allow my colleague here, who's one of the field support, to basically give us some highlight in terms of those species that we are targeting.
Xavier?
Xavier, yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So our top five that we are targeted are false puncture vine, we have the Brazilian jasmine, the Madagascar rubber vine, the tropical bull nettle, and the Yerba porosa. So those are the top five that we are working on.
Okay. Why have you singled out? There are others, I would imagine, Ron.
Okay. Yeah.
Lots of others. Why have you singled out this five?
Okay, great. So just to shed some light on that now. So basically, as you mentioned directly, so there are others, and perhaps persons are listening via radio or social media would basically ask themselves, what are those species there now? Because, well and truly, some persons might not be familiar with them. Of course, when they see a picture of them, for example, they might be able to say, oh yeah, I've seen this plant here and there. But those five plants, and before you go on to answer that question, Keith, some of the species that we know that are already here in Anguilla, for example, wild moses. That in itself is a major invasive plant here in Anguilla. Also, we have something like the yellow dad. That's another major invasive plant. But those are well-established plants, and we have to admit that if we were to make any sort of put any sort of mechanism in place to control them at this point in time, it would be extremely difficult. It would be extremely expensive, and we wouldn't have the key resources to do that. So what happened is in 2020, we had what we refer to as a prioritization workshop here in Anguilla with reference to invasive species, and this was building on another. This in itself, the workshop that we had here in Anguilla at that point in time was building on a previous workshop that the current director of the environment, as well as myself, attended sometime back in Cayman Islands, and that project in itself was basically looking at we refer to the project as a horizon scanning workshop, and it basically looks at species that has the potential to come in to your island, and trying to put mechanisms in place to kind of prevent that. But the workshop in Anguilla, though, in 2020, basically was a group of stakeholders, local stakeholders, and we, through a roundtable discussion, persons were able to identify plants that are currently here that we should try to control before they get out of hand, because they can become major invasive. And this is where the 5 that my colleague Xavier mentioned earlier, this is where where those 5 species came in. Those were the 5 targeted species for that purpose. That is more manageable to control and perhaps even eradicate.
Speak to us now about the spread. How are these invasive species spread? I know, for example, human, animal transport, garden even, can be some of the ways in which they can be spread. But talk to us about how these invasive species are spread and how quickly they can spread. Zoya Bokmaya, you might want to weigh in on this.
Yeah, good afternoon. So as you mentioned, gardening is a big one. The landscaping trade, especially for hotels, is a big one. That people are bringing in plants because they look nice and because they want to beautify their properties. And several of these plants, like the Madagascar rubber vine, for instance, is a very pretty vine/shrub with these pinkish, purplish flowers. That's a very popular one in landscaping. So that's how the plant probably got to Anguilla, and that's how it continues to spread. As well as the Brazilian jasmine. Jasmines are very pretty. They have these nice big white flowers and they smell great, so jasmines get planted for landscaping a lot as well. Some seeds can be transported in soil, for instance. So if you're bringing in soil for construction projects, if you're moving soil from one part of the island to another, seeds can stay in the soil.
So that's why it's imperative that you always check with the authorities, with the officials of agriculture.
Yes, so that's where we're
to
collaborating.
Monitor pest management control.
Yes, and collaborating with customs, for instance, to make sure that we're tracking whoever is bringing in these plants, that we're making sure we're not bringing invasive plants, but also we need to put some measures in place to regulate the movement of soil from one place to another, especially if we know that one of the species grows in an area. You can't take soil from an area without it being checked for, the seeds to make sure we're preventing the spread.
So when you see you guys ask for these checks to be done, you're not doing it just for doing its sake. There's a real reason, and a very important reason behind doing all of these checks. Some people think it might be just being bothersome and difficult, but you're saying there's a specific reason or reasons for doing this.
So to take one of our plants, for instance, the tropical bull nettle is one of the plants that we are hoping to start some control measures in the next few months. And this plant doesn't spread very far. It doesn't get eaten by any animals, so it's not being spread by birds or anything, but it does spread in the soil. So we need to track and make sure that we're regulating the movement of soil for that plant in particular. And that's actually one of the more dangerous plants that we are trying to manage, because it's covered in spines. It's kind of like a nettle. It's similar to stinging nettle, but it's covered in spines from all over the stems, all over the leaves. And it also produces a kind of toxic secretion, like a latex, from inside the plant. So if you touch it, or if you happen to break it, or if you come in contact with this plant, it can be really dangerous just from a human health perspective. And so we need to manage the movement of soil for that plant in particular.
So it's very important that we do that. The impacts of the invasive plants, the impacts on community, on the island, and people's households and so on. Ron, the impacts.
The impact. Yeah, so again, as my colleague Zoya just mentioned with reference to some of the species that you have just identified. Invasive species, invasive plants, for example, the bull nettle that you just mentioned, that in itself, one of the impacts can be health, in terms of whether or not that plant, that particular species, if I can just backtrack, I don't know if Zoya mentioned it, but if not, that particular plant, the bull nettle, is similar to what we refer to as a physic nut. There's a plant here in Anguilla referred to as the physic nut plant, or the physic nut tree. It's very similar to that. And in Anguilla, you can literally walk through a whole patch of the what you call it, of the physic nut tree, that physic nut plant. You can walk through a whole patch without any sort of problem. But with the bull nettle, the tropical bull nettle, you don't want to even walk close to it. You understand? You cannot, the slightest touch you get from it, because the leaf itself has spikes on it. And if you just walk through that and it touches your skin or so, you get serious irritation. So the impact there could be, even though that's a physical matter in terms of being impacted from the sting of it, so to speak. The economic impact can also be there because you have to go to a doctor, you have to get some sort of medication, you know. So all of those, there are impacts and things. But apart from that, one of the major impacts of invasive plants, though, is that they outcompete. One of the things we have to notice that these particular species, the invasive species, they are in a new environment. So they might take a while before they, you know, what we refer to as a lag period. It might take a while before they actually get established. But once they start, they spread extremely quick, you know, and they outcompete our native species or native plants and so forth. So that's another impact right there in terms of.
So in terms of control, Ron, and the rest of the team, how do you control, what sort of control measures, pest management measures you would wish to share with members of the public? Quite apart from identifying and knowing these particular invasive plant species, the control mechanism, the pest management mechanism, and what is the message that you and your team you have for the Anguillan public? One, about knowing these 5 particular species that you've mentioned, and how do you, being proactive, try to, you know, control, and the help that is required to control.
Yeah, well, one of the things first I will say is that you know, there's a mechanical method in terms of controlling by literally pulling them up, you know, in terms of weeding them out. But I'll give that question more to our main person in that particular area, who's the field coordinator, so to speak, and that's Zoya.
Right. So there's several steps involved in managing an invasive plant, and the first, probably most important step at this stage, where we're currently trying to wrap up that step, is mapping. So in order to say, okay, we're going to control this plant, we first need to know where is it. So we need to be very thorough in our canvassing, so to speak, of Anguilla, just so we know where is the plant. And of course that informs our methods, because if it's found in 3 places, it's going to be a much easier job than if it's found in 30 places. And so what we've been doing, what Ron and Xavier have been doing, especially over the last year, is just mapping. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to get the public involved in, getting familiar with the species, and also getting to a place where you know that if you see a species, what do you do? What are the following steps? You can reach out to us through social media, you can reach out to us by email or by phone, to let us know that you saw this species, or if you would like to report it yourself, there's an app that we use called iNaturalist that Xavier can talk about in a bit, that you can report the species yourself, take a picture, upload it, and it will tell us where it is, and so we can go verify what it is and make sure that we're taking account of all the places that this species is found. After we've mapped, of course, there are different measures, so depending on the type of plant, how it spreads, how it grows, we can either manually pull it out, or we might have to use pesticides. So we're figuring out the best herbicides, or figuring out the best herbicides and the best methods for each of the plants that we're trying to tackle. And that's something we're currently working on. Some of these are fairly easy to get rid of, but some of them do require specialized equipment, like the bull nettle, because it's so dangerous. So we wouldn't advise anyone goes out and cut the bull nettle, but you can let us know and we will handle it, because we will have the proper, protective equipment and so on to do that.
And I think what you're saying there is so important, that if you, for example, having gained the knowledge and you see it, the best and proper thing to do is to inform you, the specialist. You guys are the specialists, so you can, give some good advice on how to deal with it and so on.
Yes.
Rather than leaving it up to the individual or individuals to sort of deal with it, the best thing is to get in touch with you guys, and you will be able to provide them with the proper information as to how to deal with it.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, okay.
And so we really need the public's cooperation, not just in letting us know, but also if, for instance, we survey along public roads, but if we spot one of the invasive plants in your property, we might approach you to say, hey, we see this plant, would you allow us access in order to remove it, so that we're helping you get rid of this invasive plant from your property, but also making sure that it doesn't spread to nearby areas. So we're asking the public's cooperation, especially with access to land, and making sure that we're all working together to make sure these plants don't spread.
Yes, and it ties in nicely with your slogan, let's stop the spread of invasive plants in Anguilla. It ties very much so, and we need to stress your slogan, let's stop the spread of invasive plants here in Anguilla. But it's a most interesting topic, Invasive Plant Awareness Week, and the whole management and control. Invasive species can cause great economic harm and environmental harm. So there's the economic harm and the environmental harm. And in this day and age, when we're hearing so much about protecting the environment, then this is why I would imagine that you've taken to the public airwaves to get this message out and let our people know why it's so important that once you've spotted any of the 5 species, that invasive plant species that you pronounced, to get in touch with the team, any member of the team, and so you can get out there and help people control, help them deal with this. So that's very important. You said you're mapping and you're using an app. Xavier, you might just want to tell us how does this work?
Okay, for mapping, we have 2 methods. We use GPS,
Okay.
and we also use a online form. So both is used simultaneously. So in going out, we go to different location, we look around, see if we find the plants, and then the mapping is done. And the information is recorded and processed, getting ready for our management process.
Okay. So once you collect all this data, what happens later on? The data is collected. What do you do after that? You get all this information and it's processed, and
Yes.
What do you do with the data?
So again, the data, so the idea is to map as much as possible.
Okay.
And once we have that data, the data is going to help us in terms of developing a management plan, a management strategy in terms as to how best to control the particular species. The data is going to, basically depict exactly where the plant is and, how the best method for us to target that particular species, etc. But I would also like to give my colleague Nyasha, some say on that as well in terms of the data collection, because as mentioned earlier, this is we are not doing this alone. I mean, we are working in partnership. So Nyasha, if you don't mind, just sharing some light on that as well, that would be good.
Yes, I just like to support what Ron is saying. One of the key outputs of the project is to create a territory database, and that's what the information of surveying and mapping will provide for us. And furthermore to that, at the end of the project, we will be doing a regional workshop with the other UK territories. So we will be sharing some lessons learned and all of the information collected that we will be compiling our invasive plant management strategy and sharing this information with the other UK territories. So yes, everything that we're doing does have expected outputs at the end of the project. We're not just doing it because.
I will also add
Yes,
that
sorry.
we've mapped most of Anguilla now. We've surveyed most of Anguilla looking for these plants, and we're currently working over the next few weeks to survey the offshore keys, because of course it's much more of a confined environment. So if the plant gets there, it's a much more of a problem. So we're working very closely with the National Trust, which we know is a statutory body, and they've been a huge help and a very important partner in this because they manage the offshore keys. So we're working with them very closely to survey those islands as well.
Yeah, that sounds good. I was going to ask you about that in terms of collaborations, linkages and collabs, and I think the National Trust would fit ideally into this. In terms of the public awareness campaign which you started, how much more of this will you be doing? Will you, for example, be going into the communities and having community sessions with persons in the community so they can fully understand? You show them pictures, photographs of the particular invasive plant so they know and can identify them if they come across, have to see them. Would you be doing part of this, or does your program allow for that sort of intervention in the community, directly in the respective communities?
Yes, we would be doing some workshop with the schools, the students. Also, as we go into the communities doing the mapping and the surveying, like Zoya would have said before, if you have invasive plants within your property, we take that time to go to you and explain to you what it is, because we have done it in the past where we've seen very large patches, and we had to explain to the owners what's happening, because they don't understand, but they realize it's happening, but they're not sure what's happening. Because, for example, the Yeva Parasa just outcompete everything else that was in her yard, and the yard was just full of this one plant. But at the stage it was drying up. So one of the ways that we're reaching out into the communities is that when we're going on mapping, we would take the opportunity to do one-on-one sessions with these particular homeowners on, identifying the plants and really what's the best method to use to get rid of these plants.
So you're studying and looking at various options as to how
Yes.
best to deal with these invasive plants. Okay. One of the things I was reading in doing some research around and the team, that some of these invasive plants can actually create problems in terms of the soil quality and so on, could even impact the soil. I don't know if you might wish to share a little comment on that based on your knowledge and experience in this area. The soil, the impact on the soil even.
Well, I mean, plants in itself, the plant in itself, I mean, it can
Yes.
create the pH balance perhaps in the soil in itself, but also taking into consideration, all of that, knowing that all of the plants are, overcrowded and so forth. There is some, they can, and some of the plants are also, because of the chemicals and so forth in the plant itself, that in itself can contaminate areas and such. But I also wanted to touch on the fact that, the invasive plant in itself, can, as we mentioned earlier, it completely outcompete. Just like an invasive species, they can actually, they can also cause extinction of certain plant species, just like especially some animals, they interbreed and so forth, they can cause the extinction of, like the green iguana into a native iguana, it can cause that sort of stuff. But yeah, so the plant in itself has, the invasive plant in itself can cause all sort of other issues, so to speak, with reference to the impact on the native species of the soil and,
Yes.
and other environmental components, so to speak. Yeah?
What can you share with us in terms of creating an invasive plant management strategy? What goes into
Yeah.
this particular strategy? I know regulations, for example, laws,
Right.
but what goes into creating an invasive plant management strategy? What are some of the elements?
So invasive plant management, as I mentioned, has several steps.
Yes.
And if we're creating a strategy, which we have to as an output of this project, we have to start at the border, or before the border really. We need to make sure that there are measures in place from a customs perspective, from an importation perspective, that there are certain plants that are not allowed to be brought in. And then there needs to be a lot of education and engagement with customs at the border to make sure that if a plant arrives, you're able to ID it and able to point out this is not allowed. And then there's a lot of post-border controls, especially working with the other units of the Department of Natural Resources. Like agriculture, there's a plant protection officer. And so when plants are brought in, mostly for agricultural purposes, but we need to incorporate these other landscaping plants as well. If they're being brought in, is it a species that is allowed? Is it a species that's known to be invasive? How can we control this at the border? And that invasive plant strategy will also include our methods that we've tried and tested, or we will try and test over the next year and a half, of how to control the different species, how to remove the different species.
Yes.
And so we need to cover basically all steps of the process for plants that aren't here yet, for plants that are here, plants that are established, and how can we work towards just increasing awareness and increasing sensitization to make sure that we're not introducing more species into the possible invasive pool.
I came across in my reading at least two guiding principles of this particular plant invasive strategy: the ecosystem approach and the integrated pest management approach. Are you using one or the other, or using both in your strategy going forward?
I believe we'll be using both.
Both, okay.
We're still very much in discussions, and we didn't get into it, but the project was delayed a bit because we had problems finding the right expertise and people who are willing to move to Anguilla for the lifetime of the project. And so I only just arrived a few months ago, and so I'm still very much working with the consultant to figure out what is our plan going forward and what exactly are we going to do to manage these species.
Also in my reading, I looked at some regulatory strategies and some non-regulatory strategies. The non-regulatory measures, developing a watch list of invasive plants, incorporate invasive plant management into land use planning, road maintenance to prevent the introduction and spread of the invasive plants, training and education, public education awareness, community-based involvement, and so on. These are just some of the things I picked up from my own reading in preparation for this. I don't know how much of this you're prepared or will be incorporating into this project that you're involved with.
Yes, if I can, okay, I'll allow Nayash, and then I'll chime in. Yeah.
In terms of the training and education, last year, April, we had our first training session with different key agencies, including the Anguilla National Trust, Agriculture, and several other collaborating agencies. Most recently, earlier this month, we had a refresher training in GPS, iNaturalist, surveying and mapping. And soon in September, we'll be having our third training, which will be mostly about the methods to use in order to either eradicate and control the plants. So that's in regards to our local capacity building.
And this is targeted training for certain individuals, or is this done on a
Specific
wider,
agencies. Specific agencies.
Specific agencies,
Yes.
okay. Yep.
Also, in terms of collaborating, the same set agencies, like customs as well, we intend to do more awareness training with them, because most of everything that we've spoken about, so I just spoke about, it all ties into biosecurity. And like you rightly said, there are some measures. So when you're talking about biosecurity measures, they can be simple hygienic measures. For example, cleaning between sites, equipment, vehicles, even your footwear or clothing, to more stringent measures like legislation, where the government can implement a ban in order to prevent specific problematic invasive species from entering your country. And that's where we definitely would be continuing working with customs to help them understand what these species are and, how do you identify them? Because, they are the ones who are at the border. So in all of the border operations, from the pre-border, which is basically from the country of origin, so by the time it gets here to Anguilla, they're doing the inspections, the interventions. They need to know what they're looking for. And it's not just for plants, but maybe for mosquitoes, whatever else it can be. So, we will be working closely with them for awareness raising and to get them to understand what to look for. And although there may not be laws in place at the moment, our duty is basically one of our key objectives as well is to make preparation documents for biosecurity protocols and measures, which will be very beneficial to them.
So it's a systematic and holistic approach.
Line of work.
You're looking.
Exactly.
Yes.
Keith, sorry, if I could just...
Yes, please, Ron.
Thanks, Nyasha. I just wanted to highlight one of the points that Nyasha just mentioned in terms of, in terms of community approach, as she mentioned, in terms of getting people involved. And I know my colleague Zoya already mentioned it already, with reference to something called iNaturalist. And I'm going to ask the young man right here, Xavier, because he have been, as the project, progresses, so to speak, he have been going out and showing people about, especially with the students and the environmental club, how to use iNaturalist and so forth. And iNaturalist in itself is basically a method to help anybody identify a particular plant, animal, in a particular type of species, so to speak. So Xavier, take that opportunity just to share some light in terms of iNaturalist and how it
Yes,
works.
go ahead, Xavier, please.
Okay, so iNaturalist is an app, or it can be used online, and it can be found on Apple or Google. And with this app, it's very simple and easy to use. You upload the information, and it helps you identify plants, insects, or animals, and information is uploaded, and we can access that information as well to see where exactly you might find your plants or whatever, and we can get that information map as well.
Okay, very interesting indeed, Ron.
So that in itself, that in itself is a way of involving the citizens, and we refer to this sometimes as citizen science in terms of just trying to involve the community through the use of, simple as your cell phone. You can basically use that just to take the picture, upload it with, the app iNaturalist as such, and that can identify particular plant species. And, there are many, apart from iNaturalist, there are many other apps like that, but iNaturalist is a well-renowned one, and we would encourage people to use it as such. You can actually Google it if you just type in the word the letter I and naturalist. I think the website is inaturalist.org, and that in itself, once you download that app on your phone, you have freedom to go and play around with it and identify any sort of plant, animal, plant, animal, or any other organism that you're not aware of. And that can give you it can basically identify, help you to identify it and so forth. And, so that's the same sort of approach we want to use with reference to the project that we are engaged in right now.
I'll also just put in a plug here for our Facebook page, which we post a lot of information to. So last week, we did a few posts specifically about iNaturalist, how to use it, how to navigate it. We have some frequently asked questions. We have a link to our iNaturalist project, so you can just go onto the website and see what are the different plants we've seen and where have we seen them across Anguilla, and you can add to that. So we have information about iNaturalist on our Facebook page. We also have very detailed information about each of our 5 species. How do you identify them? How do you tell them apart from other very similar species? And we have lots of pictures up. So our Facebook page is a really good resource, not just to keep in contact with us, to reach out to us, but also to see these resources that we've put out. So I encourage everyone to go check out our Facebook page, which might be tagged in the live, or it's D+125, so DPLUS 125, or the Anguilla Invasive Plant Management Project. So that's our Facebook page.
And before we prepare to wrap up, developing an early detection and rapid response program. Anything you can share with us along that line?
Yes. So again, as mentioned, with regards to trying to control invasive
early detection and rapid response.
Right. Early detection and rapid response is the very first and foremost thing that you need to do in terms of looking at any sort of management plan. Because again, people travel from place to place, and apart from invasive species basically coming in a container, they can come in. They can also come in on. They can be attached. For example, something like you're very familiar with buggrass. Something like that can actually attach to your shoe, and you can be in one country and then you come to Anguilla, and let's say that was a complete new species introduced to Anguilla. That's one way in which the method, in which the species in itself can get to Anguilla. But let's just use something as simple as the Cuban tree frog that came into Anguilla sometime back in, I think it was during 1995, 99, thereabout, in terms of when it was first got to Anguilla. So early detection, rapid response, early detection means that you want to identify, from time you identify the species, or from time you heard about it being on the island, so to speak, or escape, so to speak, you need to really and truly have a rapid response plan. And that should be a component, so to speak, in any invasive species management strategy that we are implementing for the island. Again, speaking of invasive species management strategy, the Department of Natural Resources, we have a invasive species management strategy. It's just a general strategy, but from this particular project, this invasive plant project that we are working on right now, it's going to actually have a specific strategy to deal with invasive plants, and starting especially with the main 5 ones that we identified. Yeah?
Any specific consideration given to some incentives for landowners, homeowners? Anything been built into the program, into the project to provide some incentives for landowners? For example, if you spot this, you first come, we give you this a little token to show that you're proactive and you're helping us to get rid of this invasive species. Anything along that line? I'm just throwing that out, thinking off the top of my head.
Very, very good question. But in this particular project, and my colleagues can help me if I probably fail to identify it. The idea is to communicate with landowners and so forth in terms of trying to get a permission to allow us to walk along with them. In terms of identifying, using the property, etc., to identify the plant and so forth, and also for their engagement in basically supporting the project in one way or the other. But for this particular project, I am not aware of any particular species. However, I can say that the wider scope in terms of the environmental legislation, for example, is one bill that we are hoping to move forward with, providing that the government will take it forward, called the Environmental Management Act. And that bill in itself, it provides for persons, especially landowners, whether it's a small landowner, large landowner, who might have a particular, let's say for example, there's a particular native plant, endemic plant that we have here in Anguilla, and we want to do our best to preserve and protect that particular species, then by all rights the government, through our agencies, so to speak, will lobby and try to provide incentives for that particular person, especially to meet the conservation needs of what we are looking at. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that. So to wrap up, again, Invasive Plant Awareness Week 2023. This particular project funded by the Darwin Plus in collaboration with Durham University and the Non-Native Species Secretariat in the UK. A quick wrap up on this from you, Ron, Ayesha, Zoya, and Xavier on the program, why the people of Anguilla should buy into this program, should be excited about this program, and should pick up all the knowledge and information they can from you individuals about this particular program. So anyone can.
I will start, and then I'll allow others to give their views as well. One of the first and foremost, I would like to mention that our invasive species in general throughout the world is one of the major one of the major negative impacts to biodiversity. When I say biodiversity, I mean plant and animal life. And invasive species on a whole, based on my knowledge, in terms of being involved in this project like this for many years now, it costs about $1.4 trillion a year in terms of impacts of the invasive species. So Anguilla, we would want to play our part, play our role in terms of trying to control any sort of plant or animal that has that potential to cause major impacts to us. The issue of food security, one of the key things that we want to try to control the invasive, so we can at least we would have a more sustainable economy, so to speak, in terms of
Xavier Marshall, in keeping with their slogans, let's stop the spread of invasive plants in Anguilla.
Yes. With this, we are coming together to try control, and we would love for the general public to be a part of this event as well. In terms of farming, you have lots of plants that would kill your actual crops, and this is a very important way of removing them.
Thank you, Xavier. Zoya Buckmeyer, Field Coordinator, your closing remarks briefly.
Closing remarks. We're just, again, asking for the public's cooperation in helping us to map. If you see something, say something, as they say. If you want to reach out to us for any reason, our Facebook page is open, our lines are open. You can call the Department of Natural Resources and ask to speak to one of us. You can send us an email, or you can send us a message on Facebook, and we will respond. If you have questions, if you saw a plant and you took a picture and you want to be like, what's this? You can reach out to us, and we're very happy to help, and we're very eager to be engaged in making sure that we're all aware of what we're looking for, so that if we see something, again, as part of rapid detection, if you see a plant, we want to know so that we can all help to manage it. So use our Facebook page and reach out to us.
All right, thank you so very much, Zoya. And we've left the best for last. Nyasha Chai, the project manager, your closing comments.
Okay. I'd just like to take this opportunity to encourage all Anguillans to support this project. Don't think like, oh, I don't have an invasive plant in my yard. You may very well have one and don't know. And if you think your neighbor have one and you don't, you might be surprised how quickly it can spread to your yard. So please collaborate with all of us in this project, and I'll just end off with our slogan: let's stop the spread of invasive plants in Anguilla.
Thank you so very much to Ron Connor, Naisha Child, Zoya Buckmeyer, Xavier Marshall, coming to us this week with the Invasive Plant Awareness Program. This particular project funded by Darwin Plus in collaboration with Durham University and the Non-Native Species Secretariat in the UK. Thank you so very much for coming and sharing with us today. Lots of information, and I learned quite a bit from listening to you, the experts, talking to us about this invasive plant species here in Anguilla. Thank you so very much, and best of luck and much success going forward with this particular project. Ron?
Thank you very much, Keith. But before we close, I'll leave, so to speak. Again, just a reminder to the general public that on Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the People's Market, we will be doing a major display there with reference to the project, and we're inviting persons to come out there. There are prizes to be won, as well as apart from the prizes, lots of information to be shared. And they would definitely, on display, we would definitely have that one that we refer to as the bull nettle, that we believe if that plant ever get established fully in Anguilla, we are in for some serious problems. So I just wanted to kind of plug that in, because this is very important to us for this particular session that we're having on Friday.
Okay, thank you so very much. All right, so here's...
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for coming. We are standing by for this draw for the Premier League Cricket Championship coming up this weekend. I think the folks should be here with me. So what we'll do, let me just take a very, very tiny break, and then we'll be back in about 60 seconds with the folks for the draw for the Premier League Cricket Championship 2023, opening this weekend at Webster Park. So we'll be right back. Welcome you back for the conclusion of Talk Anguilla Rebranded Part 2 with Keith Stonegraves, with Renford Kelsick on the control at Studio A. We are now getting ready for the draw for the start of the 2023 edition of the Premier Cricket League. We have 4 teams in the competition